So, Brother Hurun Acbar, it is such a pleasure to be down here in just outside of Atlanta to talk to you about your music experience in the city of Philadelphia. And I want to say thank you so very much for inviting me in your home. It is so beautiful out here, and I can see why you decided to this paradise. And I want to start off by asking you what the music scene was like when you were growing up as a kid in Philadelphia.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure to have you, man. When I was growing up in Philly, I lived one block from one of the major strips in North Philly, which was called Columbia Avenue. It's now Cecil B. Moore Avenue.
Yeah.
But when I was growing up, there was a bunch of bars and clubs that had live music. And if you walk down the street on a weekend night, you would hear, the sound of those B3 organs. Every joint had a B3 organ in there, and usually a trio with a drummer and a sax player, or a drummer and a guitar player, and that was kind of the sound of Philadelphia as far as the so-called jazz thing is concerned. Everybody was, it was cats singing under the street lights, doo-wop. That was always,
exactly.
That was very important, But they had all of these places that had live music. Most of them had the organ trios, The organ sound was big, All those guys, Jimmy Smith being the most famous of them, And that was the influence,
Yeah, and since you mentioned Jimmy Smith, call some of the other names that people might recognize who were on the scene at that time.
Don Patterson.
Yeah.
He was one of the great ones, and Groove Holmes, Frankie G. Francesco's dad.
That's right.
Papa John.
Yeah.
It was just so many of them, man. There was a guy named Mose Davis used to play on Columbia Avenue all the time, And it was like every joint had a B3, And like those cats that followed him, people like Doug and Dr. Lonnie Liston Smith, right, and all of that,
Yeah, when you say Doug, be more specific.
Doug Karn, yeah.
There you
go. Doug Karn and Dr. Lonnie Liston Smith, and they kind of followed after. That was kind of like the next generation behind all those guys, Groove Holmes and Jimmy Smith and Charlie Earlin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Alfie Pollard introduced me to Charlie Earlin, and after that time though, after I had become, because I was a kid, I was a little kid, man.
Now, what year are we talking about?
We're talking about early 60s.
Yeah.
Early 60s. That was happening, that I can remember. Before that, I couldn't,
Yeah, absolutely.
1964, I was 10 years old,
Yeah.
So, but I was hanging out, I was a street kid. I used to wander around the street all the time, and I would always hear those sounds coming out of those places,
Right.
And then later, my older brother, who was 10 years older than me, he was kind of a beatnik.
Uh-huh.
If a lot of people don't know what that is, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he used to wear a tam, and he had some bongos, and he used to draw and try to write poetry,
Yeah.
and all his friends was into that. He was the first one to really introduce me into so-called jazz music,
Mm-hmm.
And he was into he had the records that he had that I would listen to, Lou Rawls and Nancy Wilson and Herbie Mann, and he had this record by Machito and the Afro Caravan. And he got me listening to that kind of stuff,
And it was a very diverse group of people you just talked about.
Yeah.
So when did your musical experience start?
Actually, my musical experience started when I was in elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
My elementary school, General George G. Meade Elementary School. At that time, there was a little money, flowing around from the federal government and stuff, and our school got some money to buy instruments and start a band.
Yeah.
And I was with a bunch of kids that got tested to see if they had a musical aptitude, and I was chosen to be in this band, and they asked me what instrument I wanted to play, and I had seen Louis Armstrong on TV, and I said, I want a trumpet, I want to, play the trumpet like Louis Armstrong, so they gave me a trumpet, and that was, how my musical journey kind of started as a player,
Yeah. And what was your very first paid gig?
Very first paid gig. Wow. That's a hard one, man. I don't really remember, man, because we used to, play on the street and stuff, There was a cat in Philly, Byard Lancaster, who influenced a lot of people, man. And Byard, he would come off a tour in Europe and stuff, and he would be downtown playing on the street, and that was it caught on. Everybody, that was a way to get paid for practicing.
Right.
So cats used to play on the street. I had to think about that, man. When the first time actually somebody, paid me to do a gig. And it's, you know what? I think that's not unusual.
Yeah.
Because I was in Philly, and there's this young brother, Daoud, who's a trumpet player, and I remember his dad told me he was a teenager, and we did this little thing for this sister that had a shop in Philly. It was an opening and stuff, and Daoud said, man, they had invited me to play, and Daoud said, his dad's name is Daoud too. He said, why don't you let my son play with you, I said, okay. And we played a couple tunes out of the real book and stuff. And I was on the set with him while I was playing with Jamaluddin Takuma. And Daoud was there. And I said, man, do you remember, that first gig? He said, I don't remember that, I don't remember that, man, you know what I mean?
So now, tell me about something that's very Philadelphia-based. I'm sure people probably did it all over the country, but it's sort of known for the city of Philadelphia. And I want you to describe to me a little bit about what people call walking the bar.
Oh, yeah. There was this brother Vance, what's his last name? I can't even remember the man's name. It's been so long ago. But his claim to fame was he was on the first Clifford Brown record.
Right.
And Vance, man, he used to have the jam session at this place on South Street, and he used to walk the bar. He was the first cat I ever seen. I had heard about it too, you know what I mean? Because when I was coming up, that was kind of passe, you know what I mean? But
describe the scene so that people can understand what was going on in the bar at the time.
well, you know, from what I see, mostly horn players used to do this stuff, you know, and they would be playing a solo, and the crowd would get excited and stuff, you know what I mean? And then they would just jump up on the bar,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and just be, you know, playing, walking up and down the bar, you know? Yeah, so I seen that, you know.
Yeah.
I never did it.
But you know, I'm very close with Joe Chambers,
Okay.
and Joe would always say, "Yo, you know, guys will deny that they walk the bar, but
Right.
you know, they really walk the bar." And I just thought that was something.
Well, they said Coltrane used to do it.
That's exactly.
I didn't, you know,
Exactly.
but this cat Vance, for some reason I can't remember his last name right now, but he was the only cat that I actually witnessed
Right.
walking the bar, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And yeah, you know, people get excited, you playing and stuff, and then, you know, hey, climb up on the bar, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yeah, that was.
So now
that
you
was a
were
thing.
coming up in the music scene in Philadelphia during the '60s. So what was the scene like in terms of like maybe the Heath Brothers? I think maybe Richie Workman had gone by then. But what was the scene
All of
like
them cats really had kind of, you know, they would come
Yeah.
to back and forth to Philly. Philly Joe, and
Yeah.
all of them, I seen Philly Joe many times, talked to Philly Joe. My friend Marion, I was talking Marion Salam, he knew Philly Joe pretty well. And, but all of those cats would be back and forth
Yeah.
in Philly, you know what I mean? And then a lot of New York, you know, Sonny Stitt
Yeah.
came to Philly a lot, and you know, I saw George Coleman and all those guys, man. You know, Yusef Lateef recorded the album,
Yeah.
you know, live at Pep's, and
That's
you
right.
know, that was in the '60s. You know, I was a little too young. I couldn't go to. I wasn't in the clubs, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? But my older sister would hang out at those spots, and my
Yeah.
brothers, you know.
Name some of the clubs.
Peps, the Cadillac Club. Then later, what's this? Later places came, you know, the Electric Factory and the Bijou, and you know, there were so many, man. It was,
Yeah.
you know, because there's a lot of little spots on every main little strip in town. You know, had clubs that have live music.
Yeah.
You know, but places like Peps and that, you know, those were the premier
Yeah.
type. Yeah. And the Cadillac Club was important too, you know,
Uh-huh.
because they would have jazz, and then later they started having all the top R&B groups in the region, you know,
Yeah.
come there, you know.
Before you got a little bit ahead of me, but I want to go back to something that you alluded to before we started taping. And one of the things that intrigues me about the city of Philadelphia is that it created so many different musical movements. And I want to start with your experience around the artists who would just maybe come and sing under a street lamp. And that's during the doo-wop period. And tell me a little bit about the experience you had around that musical movement and how it affected your playing, and what was the scene like during that time. I know you were a little younger, but a lot of those guys were still around.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. I met so many of those guys, man, like the Intruders.
Right.
My older sister lived up the stairs from Little Sonny's mama. So I met those cats, man. I was a little kid, you know.
Yeah.
And they used to be singing in the hallway. They used to be
Right.
singing in the hallway at Sonny's mom's house, you know. And we, you know, everybody tried to imitate all those guys. We were, you know, had, you know, all of those songs from the late 50s and early 60s. People would be, you know, singing under the street lights and
That's
stuff
right.
like that.
That's
But
right. That's right.
yeah, the Intruders was, you know, they were the first big group with Philly International.
That's
you
right.
know, you know.
That's right.
You know, I always loved my mama. That was one of the big
That's
ones before
classic.
they had like United and
That's right.
all those tunes, man, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I met all of them cats when I was a little kid, man.
Yeah. So now you played saxophone,
Yes.
and at that time, who were some of your influences?
Well, I didn't really get into the saxophone until I was maybe a junior in high school. Before that, I was trying to play the trumpet. I wasn't very good because I never practiced.
Yeah.
My high school band teacher is this cat named George Allen, who's a beautiful cat. He's still teaching, man. George, he's got to be 77, 78, if he's not 80. And he's still teaching. I ran into him, and I said, George, you know, when you gonna retire? He said, retire? He said, man, this is what I do.
Yeah.
I love this. I'm never gonna retire, you know?
Yeah.
I think he teaches at Cheney State now,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but he was my high school band teacher, and I took some private lessons with him and stuff.
Yeah.
I remember one time I never practiced. So he would give me some stuff to practice and say, all right, come see me next week. So, you know, the next week I would come and he would, you know, give me some music to play, and I would start to play it, and I would keep playing the same wrong note. And he'd point to it and say, man, what note is that? I said, that's a G. He said, well, why the hell don't you play it? Right? It's like, and he put his hands around my neck like he was going to choke me, man. He was like, man, you wasted my time.
Yeah.
You know? But he's a beautiful cat, man. He wrote a book, and, you know, he's still around. He still lives in Philly, and he's still teaching, you know.
Yeah. You know, one of the things, you know, I talked to Alfie Paulette, I talked to Leo, I just did a series of interviews with Robert Kenyatta. And the thing that amazes me is the different styles of music that came out of Philadelphia, whether it's, you know, whether it's jazz, like we said earlier about jukebox, and, you know, the Philly International movement. And what is it about Philadelphia that that encourages all of these different sounds and movements? What is it about the city of Philadelphia that that can bring those sounds to life?
Well, you know, they call it the city of brotherly love, right? We had, you know, a cat man that was like his theme, his whole career. The bagpipe player, Rufus Harley, you know, and, you know, they called it the city of brotherly love because of the Quakers.
Right.
They were the brothers, you know, but it's a very historical town, and it's a town of villages.
Yeah.
You know, where, you know, everybody, neighborhood. I grew up in North Philly. North Philly to me was so much like Harlem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because people would say, well, you know, they started calling it the ghetto and stuff. But when I grew up, it was a neighborhood.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
There was so many artists and musicians and brilliant people, because that was when, you know, before integration, where all your teachers and doctors and lawyers and stuff, everybody lived in the same neighborhood.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So it was good for the young people coming up and stuff, you know.
Yeah.
But I can't really put my finger on it, except that was the thing, that cohesion, you know, people from different neighborhoods and stuff.
Yeah.
They stuck together, and there were so many, you know, artists. People were always, you know, people like Coltrane, you know, was stretching the boundaries, you know,
exactly.
and it was all of these people, African drummers and stuff like Kenyatta, and there was a dude named Bobby Crowder who taught a lot of drummers, and the Arthur Hall Dance Ensemble,
Yeah.
which a lot of good drummers and stuff came, and dancers
Yeah.
came out of the Arthur Hall Ensemble, you know, because they taught drumming and they taught African dance. But a lot of the people that were involved in that, there was also I mean, people that were serious dancers, ballet
Yeah.
dancers, and all of that. You know, because if you studied with Arthur Hall, you had to do it all.
Yeah.
But that
Yeah.
was their main thrust for their performances with the African dance. But if you danced with them, it was like being with Alvin Ailey or any of those other, you know, big dance groups. You know,
Yeah.
and
It's amazing that you said that because there seem to be so many different cultural incubators in the city of Philadelphia. And it seemed like you had to really touch on all of it just to eat, in the sense that if you wanted to work, you had to understand and play all of these different sounds. And I wanted you to tell me a little bit about that experience with your playing, in terms of whether, you know, you may play a jazz set in the afternoon or may have to play with an R&B group at night. Tell me a little bit about the moving from movement to movement in terms of
I think that kind of came out, you know, of all of those hard bop cats that were teaching music and stuff, you know. I mean, there was a lot of people that studied classical music and everything too, you know. But all of those guys, man, they stress being able to play anything, you know. And I think a lot of it came out of that, you know.
Yeah.
That thing like, hey, you know,
Right.
you got to be able to play any tune at any tempo in any key, and you know.
Yeah.
And you may not ever get there, but you keep striving.
But
You know what I mean?
striving.
You keep striving. You know.
Yeah.
And,
So, Brother Akbar, I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
We're going to go to part two, man. It's just so fascinating to be here and talk with you. And we're going to get into some deep stories
Okay. All right.
on part two. But I want to say thank you, Brother Akbar, so much for